A lost dog vanishes without a trace, until 2 years later, when he recognizes his owner in the most unexpected place. What happens next will leave you in tears. The small town of Brookhaven had always been quiet, but on one fateful evening, David Harper's world fell apart. His beloved golden retriever Max had gone missing. 1 minute they were playing in the yard. The next, Max had disappeared without a trace. David spent months searching, putting up flyers, knocking on doors, checking every shelter within hundreds of miles. But as time passed, hope faded. Eventually, people told him to move on. But David never forgot Max. Then, 2 years later, something happened that no one could have predicted. A chance encounter. David was walking through a crowded farmer's market, mindlessly browsing stalls when a sudden movement caught his eye. A dog, a golden retriever. His heart stopped. The dog was thinner, older, slightly unkempt, but something about him felt hauntingly familiar. Then, their eyes met. David's breath hitched. Could it be? The retriever froze, ears perking up, tail stiff. Then, without warning, the dog bolted straight toward him. People gasped as the dog leaped into David's arms, whimpering, shaking, licking his face. Tears burned in David's eyes as he dropped to his knees, running his hands through the familiar golden fur. "Max?" he choked out. The dog let out a broken, desperate whine, the kind of sound only a dog who had waited 2 years to be found could make. It was him. It was really Max. The reunion was so emotional that even strangers in the market wiped their eyes. But what no one expected was where Max had been all this time, and the unbelievable journey that brought him back. David hugged Max tightly, barely believing what was happening. His dog, his best friend, had been gone for 2 years, and yet, here he was, licking David's face like no time had passed. But as the initial shock faded, questions flooded David's mind. Where had Max been all this time? How did he survive? Then, a voice interrupted. "That your dog?" David turned to see an elderly man standing nearby. He wore a worn-out flannel and had kind but tired eyes. Max wagged his tail, looking between the two men. David swallowed hard. "Yes, his name is Max. He's been missing for 2 years." The old man let out a deep sigh. "I thought so." David frowned. You know him?" The old man nodded. "I found him about a year ago, out by the old highway. He was thin, injured, looked like he'd been on his own for a long time." David's heart clenched. His poor dog had been alone, scared, fighting to survive. "I nursed him back to health," the old man continued. "Didn't know where he came from, but he was the sweetest dog I ever met." He looked down at Max, a hint of sadness in his eyes. Didn't have the heart to leave him behind. David's throat tightened. "So, you've been taking care of him?" The old man nodded. "Yeah. Named him Buddy, but I always knew he was waiting for someone else." David glanced at Max, who looked between them, tail wagging uncertainly, as if he loved them both. A lump formed in David's throat. This man, a total stranger, had given Max a home, cared for him, and kept him safe when David couldn't. And now, he had to make a choice. Take Max back home, or let him stay with the man who had saved him. The answer would change all their lives forever. David had tried to move on. He knew he had made the right decision, but that didn't mean it was easy. Every time he saw a golden retriever on the street, his heart ached. He missed Max. Then, one afternoon while working in his garage, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Frowning, he picked up. "Hello?" A familiar voice chuckled on the other end. "Hey son, it's me." David's heart skipped a beat. The old man. "Is everything okay?" David asked, his voice laced with concern. The man laughed. "More than okay. Just figured it's time you come see your boy." David blinked. "Wait, what?" The old man continued. Max, buddy, whatever we're calling him these days, he misses you. I think it's about time we stop pretending we ain't all family. David felt his throat tighten. You mean? I mean you should come visit, as often as you want. You didn't lose him, son. You just got yourself an old man and a dog to visit on weekends. A slow smile spread across David's face. You sure about that? The old man chuckled. I reckon family ain't just about who we're born with. It's who we choose. 1 hour later, a reunion like no other. When David pulled into the old man's driveway, he barely had time to open his car door before he heard pounding paws on the pavement. And then, wham! Max slammed into him, nearly knocking him over, licking his face furiously. David laughed through his tears, wrapping his arms around his best friend. I missed you too, buddy. The old man stood on the porch, smiling warmly. David looked up, his eyes full of gratitude. Thank you, for everything. The old man nodded. Guess we're stuck with each other now, huh? David chuckled. Looks like it. And as Max bounced between them, wagging his tail like the happiest dog on earth, David realized something. He hadn't lost Max. He had gained a family. A home, not just for Max, but for himself too. And this time, Max was never going missing again. David looked down at Max, his Max, who sat between him and the old man, his tail wagging but his eyes filled with uncertainty. For 2 years, David had dreamed of this moment, finding Max, bringing him home. But now, he realized Max already had a home. David swallowed hard. You saved his life, he said softly, looking at the old man. If it weren't for you, he might not have made it. The man gave a small, bittersweet smile. He saved me too, you know. He scratched Max behind the ears. I lost my wife a few years back. After that, it was just me. No kids, no family. Then this dog showed up. His voice cracked. And suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. David's chest tightened. Max whimpered softly, nudging both men as if sensing their emotions. David exhaled slowly. He could take Max back, but would it be fair to rip him away from the man who had been his family? After a long pause, David made his choice. He knelt down and cupped Max's face. Hey, buddy. His voice shook. You happy here? Max wagged his tail, but his eyes flicked between both men, as if he didn't want to choose. David smiled through the tears in his eyes. I think you already did. The old man's eyes widened. Son, are you saying... David nodded. You love him, and he loves you. He took a shaky breath. That's all that matters. The old man looked down at Max, his hands trembling. I never expected you to say that. David laughed softly, wiping his eyes. Neither did I. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Max's old collar, the one he had kept all these years just in case. Gently, he placed it in the old man's hand. Keep it, a piece of where he came from. The old man's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. David smiled. Just promise me one thing. The man nodded. Anything. David reached out and ruffled Max's fur. Give him the best life possible. The old man gripped the collar tightly, his voice shaking. You have my word. David stood up, giving Max one last hug before stepping back. As he walked away, he felt a strange kind of peace. He had lost Max once before, but this time he wasn't losing him. He was giving him a second chance at happiness. And as he turned back one last time, he saw Max watching him, his tail wagging, his eyes full of love. Not goodbye, just a different kind of forever.